Well, thank you for taking time out of this beautiful Texas day to join us here to enter the dark, forbidding world of New York in the late 70s and CBGB. My name is David Fricke. I'm a writer, senior writer at Rolling Stone, contributor to Mojo, DJ and host of the Writer's Block on Sirius XM Radio. But that's not the important thing. What I have here is a stellar group of musicians, creators who can tell you a lot about what it's like to be in one of the most exciting cities in the world at one of the best times in its creative history. I'm going to just sort of do in the center there, in the chapeau, Richard Lloyd, guitarist and television, solo artist, and author of Everything is Combustible, Television, CBGBs, and 5 Decades of Rock and Roll. Highly recommended read. You will laugh, you will cry, you will be amazed. I have Chris Frantz and Tina Weymouth, the Beat Architects, founding drummer and bass guitarist and Talking Heads, founding leaders of the Tom Tom Club. Chris is writing a memoir, and they have a new project, a duo. I've been reliably informed it's called Chris und Tina for that German flair.
Yeah.
And we have Julia Gorton with a T. Yes, a photographer whose seminal visions of New York and also the no-wave scene in the late 70s and early 80s, while she was a student at the Parsons School of Design, are a vital and continually inspiring chronicle of the city, the music, and the arts. And you can see her work on Instagram. She has a live site, keeps sending these missives from the past into the current day. Her work was featured in the Museum of Modern Art's exhibit Designing Modern Women, 1890 to 1990. She is also the director of AAS Graphic Design and Printmaking and a faculty member at the Parsons School of Design. Oh, thank you, Chris. All of the images that you're seeing here, she took them. So it's a living chronicle, it's not just a mark of the past. And finally, the gentleman who invited me to be on this panel, which was really kind of him, Chris Stamey, singer, guitarist, songwriter, producer, founding member of the BBs, musical director of the touring production of Big Star's Third, which is a show that is absolutely magnificent. Hopefully you'll be doing more of those, Chris, please.
I'm not sure we will, but I've said that every time.
Okay, well then, hope lives eternal. And also, the author of a new memoir, also extremely highly recommended, A Spy in the House of Loud, New York Songs and Stories, and he is signing copies at the bookstore here in the South by Southwest building, right after this panel. So check it out, get the book, support the authors, support the life, support the scene. First question is actually for the audience. How many of you here saw a show at CBGB? Oh, that's actually pretty good. How many of you played at CBGB? Oh, we got one over here. Oh, of course, yeah, okay, that's cool. And final question, how many of you used that bathroom downstairs? More than once. Okay, we got a couple. I first went to CBGB in February of '78 when I moved to New York. I went down to that bathroom once at a Richard Hell show, and my first thought was, has anyone from the Board of Health ever been here? Apparently not. I never used it again. But everything else about that place was absolutely magical. Now that we've dealt with the decor, I want to use this opportunity to talk about why that site, the scene, the people who were there were so vital and so continually inspiring even now. I want to start with Richard and Chris. Both of you first came here in the late 60s, early 70s, you know, not necessarily in a musical context.
I grew up in Greenwich Village.
Well, you were originally from Pittsburgh, right?
I was born in Pittsburgh, but grew up in Greenwich Village. But I moved to LA for a while.
When were you back to?
I was coming back in 1973, so that's where you get to that idea.
What was it about New York in the early 70s that seemed appealing? Because for most people outside of New York, the thing we remember most is that headline in the Post, Ford to City dropped dead. Where basically the city was bankrupt, you know, flaming barrels in the streets. I saw those when I first came to the Bowery. And it was not an appealing place to live, but it was clearly an inspiring place to live. Why?
Well, for me, I was waiting in LA for a scene to start in New York that I could join. Then I heard about the Mercer Art Center and the New York Dolls, and I knew somehow it's time to go back to New York. And then on the way driving from LA to New York, the Mercer Art Center fell down, which is typical for New York. And when we got there, there was really no place to play. And Chris, your experience?
I always loved New York. We'd go up in the summers. My dad was a doctor. We'd go to medical conventions when I was a little kid. And it's where I got my first tape recorder, and it always seemed like the shining city on the hill. But it was on a trip in 1975. I'd got a copy of Rock Scene and seen these guys whose wardrobe needed repair. And I went to this place, and because it was in Rock Scene, I thought it was going to be packed, you know, and there was CBGBs, and there was a dog, Patti and Alan Lanier, and like 3 other people, and this grizzled guy behind the counter, and it seemed fantastic. It was walking into France in 1860, and fired up my imagination. But mainly it was the music that I heard that night. That's why I ended up in New York 2 years later.
Who was playing that night?
Well, it was mainly the Planets, but there was a band called Television.
Oh, those guys.
Yeah, it was with Fred on bass, and it was, I was absolutely riveted, and I thought, every band in New York must be like this. This is what I want to do. Finally, somebody's turning a new page on all this kind of industrial rock crap that was all that we were seeing in arenas at that time. I think if I'd known it was only you guys, and then later Talking Heads and a few others that were really starting a new vocabulary, I'm not sure I would have ended up there, but I'm glad I was fooled.
Absolutely.
Well, Chris, when did you first become aware of CBGB as a site, a place? Was it after you moved to New York, or was it something that was filtering out up in, like, say, Rhode Island?
Well, we came to New York, Tina and I, from Providence, from Rhode Island School of Design, and one of our classmates had a loft on Bond Street, which is catty corner across from where CBGB's was. And the first day I moved to New York, I went to visit my friend, Jamie Dalgleish was his name. He's an excellent painter. And Jamie knew I was interested in starting a band, and he said, you know, Chris, there's this place over there, it's called CBGB's, there's something going on over there. And this was the fall of '74. And so that very night I went, and I think it was like a Tuesday night, and there was nothing happening except this one guy playing pool, shooting pool, and he was wearing a sharkskin suit and big, like Elvis-style sunglasses with the silver frames, you know. And I said, "What's going on there?" I heard there was something going on here, but it seems kind of quiet. He said, it was Arturo Vega, he was the lighting designer and designer of all the merch for the Ramones. And Arturo said, "Come back on Friday night, man. There's this band called the Ramones. They're going to be great." And he was Latino, and he had a heavy accent, so I thought, oh, the Ramones, like a Latin band.
Much to your surprise.
Yeah. And anyway, I went, I saw the Ramones, and then later I saw Television, and then Patti Smith came and did a residency, and then one night we went in and we met Debbie Harry. I mean, can you imagine? And she could really sing, you know? And it was, I felt like this is going to be the cavern club of our age, you know, the place where the incubator for all these like new talents, new sounds, and it certainly was.
Tina, when you were playing those early shows at CB's, and you know, with all the bands in the scene, did you feel as a woman playing in a band that there was support, that there was a scene that was supportive and encouraging, considering how male-driven so much of rock was, and still can be? Did you feel that it was sanctuary, but also a place to grow and develop as a musician on your own, and that there were people like Debbie and Patti Smith that were not necessarily inspirational, but also in the fight as well?
Yes, I did.
That was a leading question.
I did feel that support, and particularly from Chris, because he's the guy who brought me in. He brought everybody into the band, and people were great, because I would say, well, what kind of bass guitar should I get? And they would say, oh, you know, you should get something for your size, you know, maybe a little Gibson. I remember you challenged me on it. Afterwards, when I came back with a big, you know, Fender P bass, you said, it's so big for your size. We had a little argument about that.
It's the classic.
It had great tone.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, it had muscle.
You made your way around it, too.
Well, there was a challenge, though. I mean, you know, it was a Hell's Angels bar, and I had my
their headquarters were right around the corner.
Yes, I did have my run-ins, and of course we lived right below Houston, and there were a lot of prostitutes there, and I was often asked if I would, you know, get in a car and, you know, give people a half and half, and that sort of thing. And so, you know, but we all had to accept that it was downtown New York. It was poor, but it was very free. There was no Mayor Giuliani telling us we couldn't jaywalk. There was nobody telling us we couldn't dance or party. So it
was Abe Beam, and he didn't know how to run the city, so everything was
right.
fine.
It was falling apart. It was the Great Recession before the last Great Recession. So it was kind of cool. We had fun with no money.
I also think that the idea of maybe saying you're a woman, you shouldn't play bass, or, I mean, there was a feeling everyone was a kind of an outcast. This was a hidden corner of the city, and we were kind of bonding together. So we really didn't have time to say, oh, you're gay, you can't do this. You know, you're a woman, you can't do this. I mean,
because basically everyone had been telling all of you, you can't do this anyway. So
yes,
by gathering together,
you're wrong.
Yeah.
Well, we
everyone's
felt
telling
like
you're wrong.
hobos, with a guitar as a gunny sack, you know, a hobo that ran away to the circus and started this club where anything went, you know, and the audience members were all exciting too, photographers, writers, journalists, musicians, and once you paid, you got to stay. And we only had 2 bands a night play 2 sets. That's because we wanted to play more to get, you know, reasonably good, which we weren't.
now that also had to do with
You were better.
Hilly, you know, because, I mean, Hilly was an aspiring singer, I believe, and had to spar, and if I understand it correctly, what?
He had a single on the jukebox.
Absolutely.
Called
Yes.
Mud.
Yeah, it's kind of like our own waffle shop. But he had the idea that the band should play music they wrote, and this was a weird idea. If you were playing in bars in North Carolina or all over, you were supposed to play covers and maybe squeeze in a song if it sounded like something else.
You would pretend that it was somebody else's song.
Right, and Hilly had this petri dish. I mean, you're talking about the bathrooms, but it was a. I shouldn't put it that way. It was a space.
Spiritual
where
pathogens.
anything could happen, but you were supposed to play stuff that was from your heart and not covers.
Well,
That's right.
Julia, you are originally from Delaware, and from what I understand, you actually had a connection to Tom Verlaine in the sense that you actually lived near his prep school.
Oh, I actually went to hockey camp as prep school one summer, and Tom grew up down the street from me, and I found this out when, you know, when I was in high school, my boyfriend he'd come to New York to NYU, he was telling me all about these great bands at CBGBs. I didn't realize that scene had started even before then. So when I arrived in New York in '76, it was, I don't remember there being not a crowd there. It always seemed like there was a crowd. And so, you know, I bought all the singles and had Little Johnny Jewel. And when I was back in Delaware after that first year working as a waitress, I would stop on the way home to go to the flea market because I was collecting, you know, vintage jewelry and stuff. And there was a woman who was, I walked by her table and I hear that music coming out of the back of her station wagon. And I just thought, what is going on? Why is this like old lady playing this music? And I looked at her and I said, why are you playing this? And she said, that's my son. And so, you know, so then we figured out like where he lived, and my boyfriend and I would like sort of drive real slow by the house. But, you know, good things, all the things that made it so that we left where we were, whether it was North Carolina or Delaware or Texas or wherever, it was like we had to get out. And when we came to New York, we didn't notice that it was it's bottoming out decline.
When you first started taking pictures of the musicians, and particularly at CBGB, was there something visual, like, that you were seeing in your head that you wanted to capture of these people, or were you just sort of like trying to get moments and see if the moments started to make sense?
You know, I had grown up looking at Andy Warhol's interviews, so I knew the work of Antonio Lopez. And so before I left to come to New York, I got a Polaroid, and when I got to CBGB's, I thought these were the most glamorous, intimidating, fabulous people I'd ever seen. They were like the stars of the night. And until this night, I had never spoken to any of these people because they were the guys on stage. They were very nice, and when I would ask them to pose back by the kitchen, they would pose. So I have some Polaroids of all of this side of the stage, and then we actually worked together when we came to New York.
Did you prefer portraiture or live? Because I noticed in your Instagram site, there's a lot of portraiture, but there's one shot of Richard Hell and Bob Quine on stage at CBGB, and that shot really reminds me of one of my first nights at the club when I saw Richard Hell with the Voidoids.
I think
and
I was
it was
there.
just, I don't know if it was that night or what, but it really captures a memory that I have in my head from the music and the records that's really indelible.
I like the scene a lot, so I took pictures of people performing. But later I found that the portraits were a more intimate way of working with somebody. So for a long time I didn't look at any of the performance pictures, but I've since gone back and I was like, oh my God, you know, in one context sheet, like, there's Chris, and there's Alex, and there's Richard, and there's some, you know, there are a lot of people going through a short period of time.
So, were you the house photographer for Orc Records, or were you just not charging them? I never knew.
No, when I went to Parsons, Cinemabilia was next door, and somehow we got this word like Cinemabilia. There's this guy, Terry Ork. He's got a record company. These guys are on this record. So I would go in there and I would look at Terry, and then I would leave. I was pretending I was looking at, you know, like lobby cards and stuff. And finally, I took all my Polaroids, I Xeroxed them, and so they looked really strange. And I put them in little binders, and I left them for Terry. And then he hired me to photograph Alex Chilton the first time he came to New York. So I don't remember if I ever got paid, but I got paid in many other ways.
Well, one of the things that thing talking about Terry sort of reminds me that, you know, we talk about Hilly as being sort of the engine of bringing people in, encouraging you to play your own material, and bringing all of these bands in repeatedly night after night. But the thing is, the scene also encouraged entrepreneurs like Terry. Now, when I say entrepreneur, that suggests he made a profit and paid people. But, but there was just the fact that in order to get the music out, that was not something Hilly necessarily did. You needed somebody like Terry who was going to start working with television, who was going to put singles out, and that...
Billy was driving a taxi during the day, right? He didn't have much
No,
time.
He worked at Cinemabilia.
Terry, yeah.
Terry. Yeah, who were you speaking of?
Well, I was
Billy-
actually talking
Billy
to
had a-
Terry and Hilly, really. The
Billy
fact that
moved
Terry
pianos and
knew the
refrigerators.
music, and Hilly sort of let it happen. I mean, really, it was Terry that did the booking, and anyway, Terry should get his props.
Well, I think that's really an important factor, is that, you know, when you have a place like CB's and just New York in general in that period, it encouraged, you know, the Charles Ball, Terry Ork, the people putting out the records, the bands doing their own.
Well, Terry had the rules, that was only 2 bands a night, each playing 2 sets. That was a rule because he managed television. He wanted television to be on more. So, you know, a bill, that also cross-pollinated the audiences. And then when you paid, you got to stay the whole night. So if you saw Talking Heads, then you'd see television, then you'd see Talking Heads again, and then television again, all night long. You know, these 2 bands. Now they have, you know, 12 bands, and you're supposed to tell them who you're there to see, and nobody makes anything.
Well, when you were doing shows, a lot of the bills that you were on were with the Ramones.
The first time we played was with the Ramones. The second time was with the Ramones, but we also did many double bills with television.
But what was it like to play with the Ramones, who were so, I don't want to say diametrically different, but there was a certain
There were
contrast.
big
and compare.
differences between our 2 bands, but one thing we both shared was this this idea of minimalism. I don't think the Ramones ever voiced that
Or spelled it.
yeah, but they had that aesthetic, like everything was boiled down to its essence, you know. And in the beginning, we had that same sensibility, and I think, and television was more complex musically speaking, but they also had, all the bands at CBGB shared an idea that we're not going to be like anybody else. We're not going to be like anybody. We're not exactly sure what we want to do, but we sure know what we don't want to do.
And all the bands were completely different. And that was the amazing thing too. The bands would come in and be good and be completely different. This was absurd, really, on the face of it, that all these bands show up. There was one band that came in playing Chicago Blues, and like a month later they had another show there, and they sounded like the Talking Heads meets television, and they did not last, because they weren't themselves, you know, they weren't real.
I think one thing I picked up on with a few bands was not only the idea of let's not be like the rest, let's be ourselves or be honest, but was also let's work hard. I mean, when I first saw television, that was one shocking thing to me. And Talking Heads as a trio, I mean, certainly, and as a quartet in larger formulations, that's a lot of rehearsal. These people are really on it. They're really working hard, and I have to say there was a certain rock and roll aesthetic of, even like, I don't want to put down the New York Dolls, they did great things, but they weren't over-rehearsed. And this was let's work.
That was part of their
let's
charm.
Find, I mean, a lot of hours went in to these presentations.
We used to rehearse 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 5 hours
You know,
a
and
day.
you could hear that.
Period.
You could hear that on stage, and I know that was true with you guys.
And yes, we did. 7 days a week, 5 hours a night. And another thing we also did was we knew that we restricted ourselves. We could not play more than 1 weekend a month because we had to write at least one new song for every time we reappeared, so that our fans, because it was the same fans coming every night, so there had to be some new material, 2 or 3 new songs each time.
Well, we had new songs, and then the old ones disappeared. We had more songs come and go, you know, than songs that stuck around.
How much do you think that that ability to play as much as you did, to work on the craft as hard and with such consistency, had to do with the fact that the city and that scene, and particularly that area, you could live on very little? Right now, you know, people have to spend so much time on their social media, they have to sell their own merch, you gotta work in order to get any kind of capital to move on. One of the things about living in a city that's basically like Dresden after the war is that you can get by on very little and be able to channel that energy into creating something that is going to lift you out of that
Did
mess.
you have a tape recorder? We didn't have a tape recorder. We had to memorize everything and write it down.
Oh, we did too. But the rents were incredibly cheap. And if you broke your lease, the landlords didn't seem to care. You could move a lot. And, you know, I think that helped a great deal.
I think one thing that made a difference to me was that there wasn't this idea of winning the lottery. Now, nowadays, I guess it is possible to have something on YouTube and you get so many hits, and that kind of happened by 78, 79. Seymour signed a lot of people, there was some success, but there wasn't this idea of, well, if we play our cards right, we can, you know, buy that mansion on Long Island. It wasn't part of the equation. It was just like, if we play our cards right, can we do something we love, or can we do something great? And I actually think it was very beneficial that musically the big labels were spurning what was going on for a while. It let it evolve without the Nirvana money dangling in front of the baby.
But it's also because there was a means of dissemination that was actually very independent and homegrown. There was, I think, one of the things, and Chris and I mentioned this earlier, your photos were very instrumental in actually getting across to people who couldn't be there, and there was no streaming. Most of the acts didn't have records, or certainly records that were easily obtainable. Those images create and they did that for me in Philly when I was just starting out. What is this place? What are these people doing, and how do they look so cool doing it? And how do I get a piece of that? The other thing that is really interesting, and I think we have to, you mentioned this in your book, Chris, New York Rocker, which was an important, you know, along with Trouser Press actually, and obviously rock scene and a lot of, you know, the English papers, Melody Maker and NME, but New York Rocker was a real incubator.
Alan Bettrock.
Alan Bettrock.
And Andy Schwartz carried it on.
Yeah.
And the photographers, I mean,
Laura Levine, Bailey,
yeah, were crucial, and the fact that they could get their magazines, get their photos in that magazine was very encouraging too. And Ben Roberts, I mean, you know, Roberta Bailey, these eight, David Godless, Godless, he doesn't use David. There were those 10 photographers, maybe tops, who really changed everything.
But it was also interesting because I just did an interview with Ira and George and James of Yola Tango, and we were talking about a couple of photos in your book of bands playing at the New York Rocker office.
Laura
And you would have,
singer.
and there would be jams, and the DBs did demos there, which ended up on a compilation, Ride the Wild Tom Tom.
Yeah, well, Rocker was not only a magazine during the day, but it was a shelter for the homeless at night, particularly if you're musicians. And there was a Gnostic church next door that would chant all night, so it was a very dreamy kind of environment. But yeah, the DBs had all their gear there at one time. We had a 4-track tape recorder on Andy's desk. There were lots of parties. I mean, it was CBGB's is used as a shorthand, but there were lots of places in New York where things would cultivate.
This was what I was speaking about before when I said the people that went to CBGBs were all almost to a person creative in some way. So you had the publishers, you had the photographers, you had the writers, budding filmmakers, you know, very creative people in the fourth wall, as it were. You didn't buy a ticket and look up at the stage and then go home, you know. It was a complete immersion.
Okay, now let's get down to the nitty gritty. What did you get paid? Like, for a night at CBGB's, what did you?
We got paid $1 for our first night.
Okay, was that 4 ways?
No, each, and that made us professional musicians, I'll have you know.
Chris and Tina, what'd you get paid?
Things improved by the time we
Was it $1.50?
came around. We could, when we did a double bill with television or the Ramones, a weekend, like a Friday and was it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? Okay.
Sometimes, or Thursday,
It was-
Friday, Saturday.
I think it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We could make our month's rent, you know, the three of us, David, Byrne, Tina, and myself. We could pay our rent from what we made. Our rent was $285 or $89, plus a little bit more for electricity.
Anything left over for food, or was that just?
Well, not too much left over for food. We had day jobs. That was how we bought the groceries.
Can I dare ask what your day jobs were?
Oh yeah, I worked. Well, all three of us, Tina, David, and myself, we all worked on 57th Street, which, if you know New York, that's like the most posh shopping street in the world, really. And Tina was at Henry Bendel's, which is a very chic.
That's very
Wish I'd have
chic.
known that. I got
Yeah.
some clothes from them.
We wore our safety pins on the inside of our
Yes.
clothes.
And I was a stock boy at a place called Design Research, which was European furniture, and we had a really interesting clientele. Like Kurt Vonnegut was in there a lot, always with the coffee stains on his trench coat. And Jackie O would come in, and John Lennon and Yoko would come in and buy a white sofa, you know?
Inevitably, yes, white.
And David Byrne worked running a stat machine for an ad agency that one of their big clients was Prince Machiavelli. And you know, so we had these straight jobs, but Tina's job was, I think, the most demanding of the three. Mine was.
Well, I had to stand all day. I was in retail, and I got paid the least because I was a woman.
Yeah, it wasn't.
My minimum wage was way, way less than what the guys got. That's still a problem.
I was a
And I
student.
had, what?
I was a student living in the dorm.
I had no day job. I knew how to work the system.
An expert.
I made $10 a page doing design work for New York Rocker. And then I graduated out of the dorm into an apartment that was $110. And then I went, after that, on food stamps for a while.
Yeah, I was getting a philosophy degree, actually, for the first 4 or 5 months I was in New York, and then it was restaurant work for me, pretty much. But I could never get the good shifts because the DBs would be playing on the weekends, you know. So it was always kind of the crummy shifts when you're not rehearsing.
Well, one of the things about CBGB, and I don't think anyone really talks about this now because it's very much about the atmosphere and the music that was made there, but in my limited experience at that time, the thing that I noticed about CBGB, it had the best PA of any club or theater or arena
That's
that
a
I had
crucial
ever
thing,
been.
and sound guys too, like Robin Daner, or
Yeah.
I mean, they're. It
They
wasn't only
made the band
gear.
sound great.
The-
They
Not
really
on
helped.
stage,
wood.
though.
The room was the longest continuous bar in New York, and it was all wood. And without anything, it sounded good.
Yes,
But
it was
then they
really
put
the
in a
room.
PA,
It was like a big, long speaker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you could be up front, you could still be in the back, and you'd still get the full
That-
impact.
that's
The
thanks to
original
television.
PA, and I think the stage that you were rumored to have built was not, the stage was not that big and the PA was not so fabulous.
That's
Well,
true.
But then when the crowd started coming, Hilly upgraded to his credit.
Yes, he
And-
did.
And they had
of
a
course-
16-track tape recorder over there too. I mean, they
Yeah.
kept putting stuff in.
But there was still the flop house upstairs,
Yes.
and once in a while the toilet would overflow and come
Stuff would drip
dripping
down.
down onto the stage.
That's right. And the dog would
You
take
can,
a
like,
crap
from the-
on the stage.
From the
The dog, yes. Oh, I
Saluki.
finally remember the dog.
Those were the days.
It wasn't all like roses and, you know, sugar.
There was the
in there.
dog, and there's also the urn of chili. Did anyone?
Yeah.
That was a
No.
strange thing. Did anyone ever eat the chili?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I was afraid to lean on the
Tina and
bar.
I ate the chili. It was delicious.
I used to go to Max's they put out hors d'oeuvres for dinner sometimes, that, you know, for happy hour, and that made us happy. You know, chicken
In
wings.
an actual kitchen.
Yeah, and I actually that would be the whole meal.
Well, I would do a lot of my interviews over at Phoebe's, which was a restaurant just
you
up
got a
the
handle.
corner. And so, you know, I'd be sitting there interviewing like Bob Quine or Alan Vega, and, you know, they would be more than happy for me to pay on my Melody Maker freelance budget. But to be able to sit there and talk with musicians about this excitement that I was just starting to experience was, you know, it genuinely was magical. I think that when we come to an event like this where there's so much music, there is so much business people want to take care of, and necessarily so. That's how you live doing this today. But we can't really forget that the reason why everyone here, the reason why I do what I do is because we wanted something magical that we could then carry on further into our lives, through our lives, and for other people. And we sort of forget that it really takes a place like CB's and that kind of sort of inspirational metal that makes it happen. And it's really important to do your important 35-minute sets at the Swan Dive patio or whatever it is here, but there is something else that you don't want to forget. And what these musicians, Julia, experienced, there's actually a lesson in that, even if there aren't as many places as we'd like to do it. We're talking a lot about history, but the thing about history is that, you know, we get to learn from it and continually learn from it. Do you, in writing your books, Richard and Chris, and actually you're working on yours now, Chris.
It's early days, but I'm working on it.
You're working on the outline.
Oh, no, I'd done the album.
Oh, okay, excellent. That's a big step. In working on these books, how much did you try to, was it easy to resist nostalgia? Because I think it's very easy to be nostalgic about that period, but there's also a lot of reality. A lot of people suffered, a lot of people had hard times, and a lot of people didn't survive.
That's a really good point, David. Yes, a lot of people died, and we made huge sacrifices. I remember in order to buy my amp, I had to go without 2 meals. I could only eat 1 meal a day for 2 months in order to afford. So I had no breakfast and no lunch for 2 months in order to get that first amp.
That's how you kept your figure.
But also, the sacrifices made everything worth it. You know, when you put that amount into something, when you invest into something so much, when you're that hungry for success. I mean, we lived in a place with no heat after hours, after working hours, because we could rehearse there. We lived without a toilet in our place and no hot water. So, and we cooked on a single hot plate. We used my college mini refrigerator. It was tough. There was no dentistry. There was no going to see a doctor. So you had to be really careful not to pick up something. There were a lot of things. I mean, this was actually before AIDS. AIDS was going to be incredibly decimating. But we were really careful. I mean, I learned, oh boy, everything my mother told me is true. So, it was a lesson, and you talk about history. We should be taking that lesson even now. We're living through amazingly interesting history. We had such high hopes then. I mean, it was magical because we thought we were going to make the world a better place, and look where we are now.
Well, but the thing about all of the work that you did, the records, oh, that's quite all right.
It's not my phone.
That's Hilly calling from the great beyond. The thing about the music and the shows and the pictures, Julia, that you took, the records that you all made, is that they did in fact make the world a better place, because those are records that I can go to now when shit is the worst. I can actually listen to Marquee Moon and feel that everything was not in vain. I can listen to Remain in Light. The work that you did with Alex, Chris, for those DB's records, and then to see your pictures, Julia, it's a reminder that things can be good, that things can change, and that one step backward doesn't negate the 2 steps forward.
I always tell young people who want to become professional musicians, they first of all should
forget about the professional part.
Yeah, well, no, be prepared to make very good friends with Lady Poverty and find a dive that you can play in that nobody else wants, that they won't come in and take it out from under you. And like develop a small scene for yourself, just for yourself, you know, and maybe others will come. But you gotta be that dedicated.
I also think that I think that generally the lot of the artist is a difficult one, and that has always been the case ever since royalty stopped having you write for their parties. But I think one thing that drew me to this time was really individual efforts to make a musical vocabulary expand. There's some rhythmic things with televisions and melodic things and just the structures and what's being expressed. And with Talking Heads, I was also in awe of those records as they evolved and different players, and it was a different kind of hunger than what you're talking about. It was a hunger for where can this go? How can we grow? What is this chord? What is this rhythm? What do we have to say?
And yet you actually worked with someone very closely who was almost like a star in reverse, which was Alex Chilton, because he just scored immediately at 16 with the box tops and the letter, and then Big Star was such an important and at that point not as almost fulfilling an endeavor for him. And by the time that you were working with him, he always seemed to strike me as a guy who had been a star and kept moving backwards away from that, not creatively, not as a singer or as a musician or someone who was testing his own limits, but it was the charisma in reverse, as if he'd had the big score and found it wanting.
I only knew him closely during that time in New York, but I think there's some truth in that he's an elephant and we're all blind men. I think we all see different things in what he did, and I don't think he changed much from high school, from what I can tell. He grew up in a bohemian environment, and he was always hungry for what's new. He had this great intellectual curiosity, as well as great kindness. He just didn't like publicity or stardom all that much. But what I was talking about with the evolution of these folks' bands and what I've tried to do was very true of Alex. You know, he explored Baroque music. He learned to play the real book. He was playing, you know, people talk about Volare, but that's a great song harmonically there. And his record Cliche of All the Standards, you know. He was continually trying to go somewhere new in music. Whether it was esoteric studio technology or particular finger-picking thing of old blues. You know, he's a musician, and he was on a quest to continually find out where he could go. And that is of such great value, and I think when there's all this social media obligation and all these different phones to look at, it's hard to forget how joyful it is to sit in a room with a piano and a guitar or a tape recorder and think about where can we go from here.
Julia, I'm curious, in photographing a lot of the musicians and the people on the scene, some of them would have been players, some just sort of there. Did you get a sense that there was a real, that they had confidence and a certainty about them, or was it, like, what kind of personalities did you find coming through the photos as you would go back and look at them?
Well, they certainly had a lot more confidence than I did. And, you know, I was thinking when you were talking about Alex, I think isn't it funny how things happen that, you know, I have a boyfriend from high school, he moves to New York, he hears television, I go to Parsons, I meet Terry Ork, and then somehow Terry says, can you photograph Alex? And so I remember going terrifyingly, probably, I took the bus uptown, I met him. You knew who he was? Oh, he was like a star. I mean, that song that he had such a hit with, I mean, I'd never met somebody as famous as Alex. And so, you know, I remember going up to this little apartment, and then we took the bus all the way back downtown to Terry's loft, and I photographed him at Terry's loft. And there's a picture that was on the slideshow where you can see the television stencil up on the wall, and I remember just thinking, I'm scared to death, but I'm in the big time now, you know? And I don't know, I think all the musicians, I was a fan. I looked at them as a fan. And so they all seem super cool and super confident to me.
Me too, Julia. I looked at them all as a fan. They were so cool.
I remember you on the stage, and I would just think, gosh, she's
well, I was trying to disappear.
Oh, you did not disappear.
What was it? Actually, you took a lot of really important photos with Lydia Lunch, who was somebody who was, I remember seeing some of the early Teenage Jesus and the Jerk shows, and obviously that whole scene with the contortions and DNA.
She was confident.
And confident was not something she lacked. Did you, what kind of a relationship would you have creatively with her in terms of shooting her? Because those images were really, they were very striking. They said a lot about her work, which was important.
She was like a film star to me, and I don't think she would have ever spoken to me except, well, I asked to take her picture. But I think, you know, when you were talking about being poor, Tina, I remember when bondage pants came out, and I wanted a pair so bad. And they were maybe, you know, $35 or $40. So I went and I bought some vinyl, and I hand sewed for myself the tightest, tightest vinyl pants I could make, and they didn't even fit my daughter in like 5th grade. They were tiny, and I was wearing them the night when I met Lydia, and I think if I hadn't had those pants on, and she said they were like cool pants or something like that, and then we started working together, and she, very, very self-confident, very glamorous in her way, and you know, we shared a lot of, I think, you know, the idea that she had that special it. And when I look at the pictures of her now, I think I feel so lucky to have met her and to have met all of you, you know, first as a fan.
Was there a point, as, you know, particularly with Talking Heads, television, and Chris with the DBs, where you could tell that CBGB, let's use that location as kind of a, sort of an example, where you could tell that what had been so important in the creative process had become more of an ideal that traveled? Because you went on the road. I first saw Talking Heads in November of '77, and I saw television on the Peter Gabriel tour. When you were taking this out into the world, could you tell that CBGB was, or New York in general, was becoming an ideal that others followed, that it was becoming more fertile elsewhere because of the work that had been done there?
Oh, definitely. The first tour we ever did, proper tour, was supporting the Ramones in the UK and Europe. And everywhere we went, it was, the posters would say, like in France, Rock New Yorkais de CBGB, because the word had gotten out that there was something happening there. And, well, you remember.
There was some
Every article in Melody Maker or Sounds or NME was all about
New York rock in England. I
There were
remember
people
some
from
people
Japan.
people coming from
Japan.
France, and they drove from the airport to CBGB's, and they got out and they walked in and went, This? This is the famous CBGBs? Is just shit. Merde.
Yeah.
No, but there were people from Japan there at the CBGB Summer Festival in '75, really early on. And there were people coming from all over, from Germany, France, UK, and they would, you know, afterwards they would come, you know, from the NME, and they would come and they would say, wow, look at where you live. No wonder you're so creative. And we thought that was so odd.
Yeah, you're not poor by choice. Well, but there was also a point where, like in television's case, in your case, you didn't go back to play at CB's. It was as if that point had come and you had to take it out, and the paths changed, and that was, you know, true for the DBs as well.
But you know, we still went there. Even though we weren't really performing there anymore, we would still go and hang out and say
Free
hi.
beer.
Yeah, free beer. Say hi to everybody, and you know.
A movable famine.
Yeah.
Check out the new bands, the Cramps, the B-52s that were
Oh, God,
coming
they
up.
were good.
Yeah.
Move to the Mud Club or Tier 3, there would be the little pockets. Jim Farrat would be doing interesting things, new clubs all the time. And the
'Cause you
money
had
was getting
Garage and
better. You could actually
Danceteria,
make
yeah.
$500 or $1,000, even if you're not a famous band in New York. I mean, so it, you know, there was kind of a CBGB state of mind, maybe, but it wasn't really that centered around that club after a while. I mean, seeing television at the bottom line was where it had kind of moved after a certain point.
Sure. Had to move out of that CBGBs after a while, but you took it with you.
Well, it was interesting because I think for the artists, you would move out because that's just the nature of growth. You find new places to play,
That's
new
right.
pastures. I kept going back because I would see whatever the next phase was, if it was the No Wave, Contortions, DNA, Teenage Jesus, and actually some of the best shows that I saw there would have been actually later than that. Sonic Youth, Living Color, who killed at that place. The Psychedelic Furs, Manic Street Preachers, and I have to say one of the best shows I ever saw at CBGB was, I'm going to say it was maybe 2002, 3, maybe 4, was Blue Cheer.
Oh my God.
They played, it was a Wednesday night, and it was two of the original guys, bassist Dickie Peterson and drummer Paul Whaley. They had a guitar player who'd been with them for 20 years. They had their amps at 11. They had the PA, and they did the first two albums. They were louder than God. It was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen, and there were 50 people there.
I saw them at the Fillmore East a number of times.
You all may not know Blue Cheer, but they're famous for having been so loud that they had to record one of their records on a pier in New
Pier
York
57.
because no studio could contain the volume.
But the thing that struck me was that there were only 50 people there. And that last night at CB's when Patti played the final show, and Richard, you were on stage with her.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me was I was standing in line waiting to get in, and I heard all these people around me saying, oh man, I'm really gonna miss this place. And I'm thinking,
No.
you weren't there for the Vibrators the other week, you weren't there for Soundtrack of Our Lives, you've missed Blue Cheer. I'm not saying that's wrong, but like, why did you stop going?
Mhm.
And I think that's partly the nature of life itself. You know, people move on and do other things, but we've now come to a point where it seems like it's almost like the cathedral at Notre Dame
No,
without
it's
the
a
spires and the cleanliness.
Now
Our
it's a
kids
restaurant
played
and an
there.
airport.
Yeah.
Our
And-
own kids played there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we never stopped. And
Tina said our boys performed at CBGB's. I think they opened for you.
Oh yeah, they did. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
They were better than we were.
I think the real CBGBs is the next CBGBs. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's maybe had some shows at the Village Gate, but he opens this dive bar, a band comes in and says, can we play here? And from that, you know, this whole thing grows, and that could be in Austin or that could be in Chapel Hill. You know, it's just kind of some grit and determination, and you know, I think that's the CBGBs I would look forward to, is the one that people make in their own
The one that is
tomorrow
here.
or Sunday when you go home from this place.
But at the same time, if you're driving around Austin now, or going through New York, or just walking down the Bowery today, where it's, you know, Barbados at that address, God bless, at least he didn't tear it down. You know, there's the Bowery Hotel, there's restaurants. You know, it's not something I recognize, and yet, where can you find that in New York? You can't even find it in Brooklyn that easily now because of all of that money and gentrification pushing out. You know, when I did an interview with Dave Grohl for this Sonic Highways series that he did, and one of the things that in the New York episode, I said was like, you know, I'm glad New York isn't as dire as it was when I moved here in 1978, but I wish the character didn't all disappear. That there's a place for this to happen again.
Did they call it Brooklyn? I thought maybe Brooklyn was that. Queens, okay.
Queens, maybe, I don't know. It's like, but where? And I think the question is, where do we find this in a culture that's really driven by consumerism? Everyone's locked into their phones, and because there were no. You were booking gigs with pay phones.
Something like that is like mushrooms. It'll only grow in the dark. And then people find out about it, and you know, it withers. You got to find your own place, your own little dive. Like Chris said, find some place that's just opening and convince them to have live music, and you're the live music, you know? If you don't do that, it isn't going to start.
It's also the lack of generosity. Hilly, Crystal, and Karen too, they were really generous. We got between us at the door, apart from an 8% sales tax, we got the door.
Yeah. He didn't know any better, I guess.
There's a big
No, we made
difference.
that deal first thing. That was the first thing. We collect the money at the door and count. You know, that was it. We put Roberta Bailey at the door, and she wouldn't let anybody in without $2.
You know, one thing we haven't talked about that I think about a lot is that what kind of set the stage for the way things changed around 77, 76, 78 was how bad it had gotten. And, you know, I was going to arena shows in North Carolina, and, you know, after a certain point, the music had nothing to do with me, whether it was kind of like Yes, but Genesis, you know, or Humble Pie. There was kind of the really the loud rock or the overly complicated stuff, and I couldn't find it anymore. So I think maybe that was happening around the country too, that things had gotten kind of bad, and that set the stage for this change. And this is going to be a left turn, but I think about that today in politics. To me, things are kind of bad, and maybe there's something that's going to come out of this.
Do you think that there's a left turn possible in music, in an atmosphere where everything is available so instantly? One of the things that I think about, particularly with streaming and all this digital whatever, is that when you have access to everything, you treasure nothing. And this notion that you're getting these messages from, you know, even in Philadelphia, a television, Little Johnny Jewel or Patti's Hey Joe single, that was like a message from Mars. You know, this was something that was completely alien to what I was
social media has
experiencing.
anything to do with it. I think when you're writing music, you go into that place and you're in a room by yourself, or you're in a room with a few other people, and it's the creative. And so I don't think it really matters, YouTube, so much.
But I'm thinking more on the other end, where it's where the process of discovery for someone who is not there in that room with you and could be waiting for that song, that message, that rhythm, that idea to come out and say, okay, this is something that I can relate to that I don't have yet. This is the thing that is actually going to put me on a path. And how do you connect with those people when you're cutting through or trying to cut through just like a tsunami of everything?
It shouldn't be your goal if you're an artist. I think the artist makes what they do. I mean, it's a goal if you want to pay the rent. Absolutely, no problem with that. But I think that all comes after the making of the art, you know.
Well, we hit the 0 hour. That red thing is blinking at me. I guess if this was CBGB, Haley would send the dog on stage, and you know, the dog would do whatever. This has been.
Get to questions.
Oh, I had all the questions.
I want to stick around.
All right, let's go. Let's get one more here.
You just previously mentioned the digital streaming and the tsunami that comes with it, and I kind of had two thoughts there. And number one is it enables a lot of people to get music out who otherwise wouldn't be able to. However, to your point, it can be lost through the tsunami. And the other is, like in any big city, you have that tsunami anyway, even before you, there's a million places to play, there's a million bands, and unless you can find that one spot, like you guys have been discussing here, it can still be overwhelming. So I guess my thoughts are, that's not going away. That's only going to continue to become a bigger tsunami. And the question to any of you, what are your thoughts on that continuing wave getting larger and being in our future?
I think there's too much music coming out from people who shouldn't be able to put out music because they haven't worked at it.
I have to admit that when we had the internet and everything, I thought, every idiot with a half-formed thought now has access to my life.
So
And
it's
like,
also, it's mechanical royalties. It used to be that when bands kind of figured out they're not going to get paid except for the guy at the front writing the songs, he's getting a new car, and everybody started writing songs, but they didn't necessarily go through this. They'd been practicing guitar for years, but they didn't necessarily go to the songwriting ladder. I really kind of blame that. I'm happy that I get mechanical royalties, don't get me wrong. But a lot of people who are really good at playing keyboards are not necessarily God's gift to writing music. But if they're going to get paid, they need that on the record. Is that a weird?
No, I think it's focus on your gift. You can't be good at everything.
Yes, and I think how you break through this tsunami, as you refer to it, we learned this in art school. It's great to be influenced by all the artists that came before you, and it's important to be knowledgeable about them. But what's of the utmost importance is to do something that's unique unto yourself. And once in a while, somebody who's doing something unique unto themselves breaks through all the walls.
And keep in mind, actually, that the Beatles played for about 6 years, making nothing, living in squalor before they even got close to a break. So
no one would give them a deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it took a guy who made comedy records, George Martin.
Well, they were our model, at least me individually, about television, because they played in Hamburg 5 sets a night, which is why we devised it. We got it off the double feature of the movie, 2 sets a night. 2 bands, 2 sets a night. It was a way to play more, rehearse more.
the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the more you do it, the more you love it. Can we take one more? All right. Anybody else? All right, we got a gentleman in the back there.
Yeah. I come from Oslo, Norway, and I made a pilgrimage to CBGB the summer of 1976. You already heard about it in Norway. I have a question. I read many years ago that the interior and the furniture of CBGB had been preserved, and there actually was a plan to rebuild it in Las Vegas, of all places. Has this happened? Is it still preserved?
I hope not.
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, apparently there wasn't a plan to do that, but I think it went south.
But it's Barbados now, right?
Yeah.
But I have to say that I played there like 3 years ago, which is probably horrific, with playing songs of Alex's. And did you play that show with us? And they put in a stage, they bring in a sound system, they pull all the clothes out of the way, and it's like kind of like CBGB's with a new bathroom. for one night, and then it goes back. It's like Awakenings and Robin Williams. I mean, very weird. But it was nice to be back.
I believe that a good deal of CBGBs is in a warehouse somewhere. I'm not sure who owns it, but it's being preserved in some form.
Well, it was funny, there was, for a very brief moment, there was an annex of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in New York on, I think it was on Mercer Street.
Yeah, downtown.
And at one, I think on the opening night, they actually had what they said was, I don't know, I can't remember if it was the actual thing or a recreation of the bathroom. And I looked at it, and actually I was standing there with Dick Manitoba from the Dictators, and I'm like, you know, if this was for real, it would have like hazmat tape around it. You know, it would be like the boy in the bubble.
If you were clever, or if you were one of the musicians, you used the woman's bathroom.
Actually, Tina, that's an interesting point.
But that wasn't that nice either.
What were the provisions for a woman in a dressing room? Or were there none?
There were none. There were no dressing rooms, but it didn't matter. I think what's really important for young people moving forward now is just forget all that. I mean, you know, you can know the history, know what went before, but start from scratch all over again as if you don't know what you're doing. You know, this is how you come up with something original and new. Know what happened before, but start all over again.
Let's see if we can take one more. Do we have?
Not a shy people.
Ah. Oh, sorry. Gentleman over there.
So I go to school at Cooper Union, just up the street from where CBGB used to be.
Uh-huh.
And the neighborhood's totally different from what I imagine it was when you guys were, walking the streets then. Can you speak a little bit to, if you've been back there recently, what you think of the development of it, and is there any way to preserve or return to a more authentic kind of atmosphere in that area?
I think it is authentic for what it is now. It's just, I go to the beach and it's different every time. I think that it shocked me taking my wife there, and you're gonna love this place around the corner, and that corner is gone. NYU's bought the entire area, but I don't know that it's good or bad. I think it's authentic now.
Cooper Union is still the same. That little square with
the Sulka's still there, right? I was there a couple of weeks ago. Jim Spa, I hope, is still there.
Yes, Jim Spa's still there.
There's some still points, you know.
It's still, some of it's still there, but it's overrun by about 100,000 NYU students. So the character is so different that people ask me like, oh, I'm coming to New York, tell me some interesting things to do. I'm like, yeah, no. I can't think of anything because it just doesn't interest me anymore. I find other places that are new to me interesting.
New York real estate is just insane. They have no respect for the past, no respect for heritage. I just bless Jackie Kennedy Onassis for preserving, Grand Central. I mean, because it's absolutely awful what they've done to New York City. But that's every city, and only by kicking and screaming can we hold on to something. But we tried to hold on to CBGB, but NYU wasn't having it, and certainly not the man who owned the building. The real estate person, he said he had his first kiss at CBGB, but he wasn't going to be sentimental about it. No.
Well, I'm actually hoping for a plunge in real estate values so that all the Russian oligarchs will leave, and then we can get back to business. I don't think that's going to happen, but I live in hope. This has been amazing. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. One more time around, Chris Frantz and Tina Weymouth, Richard Lloyd, Julia Gorton, Chris Stamey, be signing books right after this is fine in House of Loud. Thank you very much for hanging.